Let's get these boys moving. Form them into regiments. I don't care what regiments they used to be in. Make new ones.
Yes, sir.
Come on, boys, form up!
Buell won't get here till nightfall. Wallace is still 6 miles north.
Order Wallace to come here at once with his men. Sherman?
No news.
On the first day of the Battle of Shiloh, about 40,000 Confederate soldiers surprised the Union Army and begin pushing forward. It is the largest attack in American history up to that time.
When Grant finally got to Pittsburgh Landing, officers didn't know where their men were, their men didn't know where the units were.
Grant immediately begins to assess the situation. It is almost as if battle clarified his mind, and he could see the central thing he needed to do: to remain calm, to collect soldiers who have straggled back into the area, and begin to plug this defensive line.
Very bad, Private?
It's only a scratch, sir.
So you can fight. Come on now, boys. Pitch in. I'm right behind you.
Grant makes his way around the battlefield, not caught up in the chaos, thinking, where are my commanders? What's their assessment of the fight and how it's going, and what can I do to assist them?
If Pittsburgh Landing falls, Grant knows his army is gone.
If the Confederate plan is to trap the Union Army in this cul-de-sac along the Tennessee River, then Grant will utilize this trap perfectly to fight a delaying action, to hold out until Don Carlos Buell's reinforcements arrive. He has a whole division under Lew Wallace much nearer, and as he goes around and he talks to the different division commanders throughout the day, he will tell them, hey, Lew Wallace is on the way, should be here any moment now.
There's confusion and incoherence on a battlefield, but Grant had enormous control of his emotions. There was physical courage, this quiet competence, and he was a great horseman in a day and age when that was a very important skill to have on the battlefield.
A number of attempts were made by the enemy to turn our right flank, where Sherman was posted. General Sherman, situation?
General, the boys bound that they didn't break. I need reinforcements now. Where's Buell?
No Buell. I'm sent for Wallace. Can you hold your position?
Yes, sir. But it'll cost.
At the Battle of Shiloh, Sherman and Grant, while they had never been what you would call good friends, they will first come into their own as this wonderful duo who will turn out to be one of the great working partnerships of the war. While so many other fragments of that Union Army dissolve in panicked retreat, Sherman slows the Confederate onslaught.
Nevertheless, Grant knew that he may need that division of Lew Wallace's to just survive this fight. But there's great confusion with Wallace's division on how they should get to the battlefield, and Wallace does not show up. As the Confederates moved forward, the fighting became more and more constricted. It becomes a very chaotic, brutal fight, and Grant recognizes that at points of chaos, when everything is going wrong, you just simply have to do something to regain control.
Contrary to all my experience up to that time, we were on the defensive. The endeavor of the enemy was simply to hurl their men against ours, with a disregard of losses on their own side.
Grant realized he needed to buy time, or his army was about to be overwhelmed.
Shiloh, the first day doesn't go well, but in the chaos, noise, the friction that we know is inherent in a battlefield, nobody gets it right initially. Nobody. Grant is able to learn through hard experience, and he has this vision of how it's going to turn out. In spite of all that's going bad around him,
Grant is already thinking to fall back gradually, holding successive lines of defense, basically trading space for time, to hold out until our reinforcements arrive.
And so orders went out to all his division commanders to hold their positions, as Grant put it, at all hazards. His men constructed this defensive line along this deep ravine. The Confederates have to go down into this ravine. They make one charge up out of the ravine into this whirlwind of Union artillery and musket fire. They are driven back by this intense fire. Orders start to echo down the Confederate line that we're done, stop the attack. Beauregard, stop the fight. We'll finish this up in the morning. Grant, sitting on horseback watching as the Confederates fell back into the ravine, said, "Not beaten yet by a damn sight."
Grant, with this dogged determination, he thinks that nobody can beat him.
By the time darkness falls, yes, it's been a bad day for the Union Army, but they haven't been pushed off Pittsburgh Landing. They're still holding on to that strip of ground. And what's more, across the river, Don Carlos Buell is finally starting to arrive, and there are Federal gunboats out on the river whose shells are keeping the Confederates at bay in the darkness. He had the gift of being able to take in a landscape, a map, and know almost at once what needed to be defended, what couldn't be defended. And what Grant had seen at Shiloh was that the Confederates had exhausted their last energy just in getting as far as they had. Grant had seen that if, in the night, Buell's troops could be ferried over and Grant's army could be rallied and somehow reorganized and put back into position for a counterattack the next morning, then the Confederate army itself would collapse.
Grant was determined to stay and fight. Everything he's learned came into play in making that decision. That's the point where Grant becomes Grant.
This day, everything was favorable to the Union side. We had now become the attacking party. The enemy was driven back all day, as we had been the day before.
It was another brutal day of fighting over much of the same ground. But by 2 in the afternoon, Confederate Commander Beauregard ordered a withdrawal back to Corinth.
The battle is over, and it is, technically speaking, a victory for the Union Army. But it's a victory which has been won at terrible prices.
Huge casualties. 25,000 killed, wounded, and missing. This is the first time in American history that we've seen this. The armies in the Revolution and the War of 1812 are smaller than the casualty count at Shiloh.
I saw an open field on the second day so covered with the dead that it would have been possible to walk across the clearing, stepping on dead bodies without a foot touching the ground.
Shiloh itself means place of peace. Shiloh for 2 days was anything but a place of peace. Shiloh is incredibly important as the place where our country woke up to the reality of what it had signed up for. It was as if from the battlefield, a metaphorical postcard went home to America. And it said, with a picture of the dead, "This is what you've signed up for." It forced us to wake up. It forced us to grow up. It forced us to realize that this was going to be much harder than anybody had imagined.
Keep these men digging, Captain. Let's be done with this by nightfall.
Yes, sir.
Ulysses S. Grant has now gone down the Mississippi River. He's in the midst of the Vicksburg campaign. In 17 days, Grant's army marched 200 miles and won 5 battles. And now, we are talking about a siege.
When Grant first settles into siege operations, he digs a line opposite the Confederate ones, so you can cut off the key routes of supply to the city. And then in case a Confederate force came from his rear, he then dug another series of entrenchments facing the other way.
And now he's going to ring Vicksburg with artillery. In fact, he's even going to bring naval artillery off naval ships to bombard Vicksburg. We want to put them under the maximum pressure so that they recognize this sacrifice is no longer worth it.
The primary strategy of any siege is isolating the people you are besieging inside, causing them to use up both their military resources, but especially their food, to force them to capitulate. So the consequence of this is Grant's army will grow to over 70,000 troops over time, and it's a ratcheting up of military pressure.
Now, the Confederate government and Richmond is rather concerned about the situation at Vicksburg. And there has emerged a group that believes that less focus needs to be placed on the east, where things are going well, and more focus needs to be put on the west, where things are not going well. Robert E. Lee's response is, even if I send troops to Vicksburg, by the time they got there, it might be over. And Lee decides to go north and try to seek a decisive engagement with the Federals north of Pennsylvania. At the same time, Grant keeps the pressure up at Vicksburg to end the siege.
By the end of June, the Confederate Army of Vicksburg was subsisting on a handful of peas and rice issued once a day per man. Even their water would be rationed to 1 cup per man per day.
So now, as the temperature of the summer continues to get hotter and hotter, Grant will dam up all the creeks that are going in there. Confederates are being shelled by Union gunboats as well as Union batteries.
But also throughout the siege, you have a civilian population trapped in the city, estimated at about 2,000. And the citizens lived underground in man-made caves to escape the constant bombardment of Union cannon and heavy mortar. And about the only time they came out of these caves is when the Union artillerymen ate their morning, noon, and evening meals.
Grant knows full well the suffering of the civilians in Vicksburg. He doesn't relish any of it, but I think he does believe, without breaking the will of the Southern people, that this war is not going to come to an end.
These civilians at Vicksburg, who weeks earlier were able to get all the food they needed, were clearly starving. And they started eating anything that moved, rats included. And by early July, it was clear that the Confederates were near the end of their rope.
On July 3rd, 2 persons were seen coming towards our lines bearing a white flag. It was a glorious sight to soldiers on the line.
And on the hot afternoon of July 3rd, at the very same time Pickett's legions were storming over the stone wall at Gettysburg, the Confederate commander, John Pemberton, would ask Grant on what terms he would receive the surrender of the city.
General Pemberton.
Your terms, General, surprise me. I propose...
No proposals. Terms won't change. Unconditional surrender.
Sir. Listen, we need to offer terms.
No.
Be practical. What are we going to do with 30,000 prisoners? Better offer terms. What do you think?
General? I'm prepared to accept the parole, but only if my men walk away with all of their personal property.
By personal property, do you mean to include slaves? Sidearms, horses, no slaves. No slaves leave with you. You have until 10 o'clock tonight. Then we attack the city.
Up to this point, Grant's reputation is unconditional surrender Grant. And yet, here he paroles the men that are there. And it shows what flexibility of mind he had. I think he makes the calculus of, what if we send these 30,000 scarecrows back to their towns? What are they going to tell them? We just got whipped.
See the corporal inside your bro.
General Grant.
Retain your sidearms, General. The enemy had been suffering, particularly towards the last. I saw our men taking bread from their haversacks and giving it to the enemy they had so recently been engaged in starving out.
Grant doesn't have a hatred of Southern people. He sees them as Americans that have gone astray. He doesn't agree with their cause, but he cares for the people themselves. That really colors the way he deals with the Confederates throughout the Civil War.
Vicksburg surrenders, and the Mississippi is open. And as Lincoln says, the Father of waters flows again, unvexed, to the sea. And the great thing is that the news comes to him the same weekend as the news of the victory at Gettysburg.
My dear General, when you first reached the vicinity of Vicksburg, I never had any faith except a general hope that the expedition could succeed. I now wish to make the personal acknowledgement that you were right and I was wrong. Yours very truly, A. Lincoln.
Grant and Lincoln first meet as correspondents. And their correspondence is quite wonderful. They are both men of the West, and I think they share a certain philosophy and perhaps a certain attitude. And I think it really set the terms for their future relationship. This victory was a culmination of a very long campaign, full of trial and error, full of Grant figuring out, how do I capture what seemed an impregnable fort?
The Vicksburg campaign has been studied by military professionals ever since July of 1863. In fact, in the Army's warfighting manual, it highlights the Vicksburg campaign as the most brilliant campaign ever waged on American soil. And so, whereas the Civil War is often referred to as the last of the old wars, first of the modern wars, Grant can be termed the first modern American warrior.
So, what brings the famous Mark Twain to my parlor?
General, a reason for my visit. I hear you've agreed to write your memoirs for the Century magazine.
They've made me an offer.
And what royalty have they promised you?
10%.
General, they are treating you as if you were a private in an army nobody ever heard of. That may make you a better offer.
But you're too late, Clemens. Now I've committed to Century as publisher. And I can't go back on my word.
Let me publish your memoirs. I promise it'll leave your family well off and the nation richer for your story.
In 1884, Ulysses S. Grant, Civil War general and two-term president of the United States, was now faced with poverty. And Sam Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, arrived at his home to see if he could help Grant by having him write his memoirs and leave a lasting legacy of how he saw the war and how he saw one of the most pivotal moments in American history. So eventually Grant did go with Twain's offer to make money for his family to save them from poverty.
But during the summer before he started writing, he bites into a peach, and he says that somehow something stung him from the peach in his throat. He can't figure out what it is. He sees a doctor, and at that point, they realize that it's cancer and that they can't operate, so he realizes that it's fatal.
What is to be my fate? Will I have to lay awake again, making it a study how to get a breath? It is about as much as I could stand to go through another night.
Grant wrote the memoirs under horrific conditions. He said that every time he drank a glass of water, it was like drinking a glass of molten lead. This was a truly heroic effort of Grant in agonizing pain, writing the memoirs, and he literally willed himself to stay alive.
And it's the final battle of his life, the battle to outrace his terminal cancer in order to finish his memoirs and rescue his family from bankruptcy.
But as everything else in his life, he did not let it defeat him. In the end, he would prevail and he would finish the book.
These volumes are dedicated to the American soldier and sailor. U.S. Grant, 1885.
He dies 3 days after writing the last page. And Twain realizes at once that what Grant has written is a monument in American literature.
My family is American and has been for generations in all its branches.
This memoir is hugely important and hugely powerful. It earns over $500,000 for Julia, which of course in today's money would be much more. It's very successful and people read it everywhere. I think something people tend to forget now is that Grant, at his death, was arguably the most famous American in the world.
The response to his death was amazing. The national funeral, which took place in New York City that day, began with bells ringing all over the country, north and south. It was just a national outpouring of grief for him.
In 1900, Theodore Roosevelt suggested that Grant, Lincoln, and Washington loomed as the three great heroes of American history. So even as late as the turn of the century, he's part of this heroic firmament. And then in the decades that follow, that diminishes rapidly.
What happened was that the history of the war came to be written by a lot of pro-Southern historians who exercise a powerful sway. It's often called the lost cause.
The lost cause narrative is really an effort of the South to say, how did we sacrifice so much for a cause so bad as slavery? So they changed the narrative. No, it was about states' rights and independence. And so that narrative has become the predominant narrative. And I think part of that gets buried in there is the role of Grant.
There were three separate attacks on his legacy. Grant is known by many as the butcher. Grant is known as the drunk. Grant is known as the corrupt.
Everything else gets stripped away, and you've got the guy that won the Civil War, and he was an alcoholic and a failed president.
And the lost cause casts Grant as the villain and Lee as the hero. So once the memory of that generation that venerated him passed on, he was forgotten.
And so Confederates lost the Civil War, but they certainly won the war of myth. And Grant was on the wrong side of that myth.
Shall I read one to you? This one's from a Confederate soldier. Yours? Dear General Grant, I hope you will allow one who, when a boy, laid down his arms at Appomattox and pledged allegiance to the Union, to express his
warmest sympathy for you and your suffering. I have watched your movements from the hour you gave me my horse and sword and told me to go home and assist in making a crop. I have been proud to see the nation do you honor. And now, dear General, in the hour of your pain, I weep that so brave, so magnanimous a soul must suffer as you do.
There's something like really beautiful and American in his whole story. He just comes from nothing.
From a hard scrabble background, who's had a lot of hard times and failures in his life, who rises to the highest level of power and becomes the greatest general of his time.
Against all odds, against incredible obstacles, he became the winning general of the Civil War.
He was the commander of the victorious army that led to the emancipation of 4 million people.
Grant is the unheroic hero of our greatest national epic, the Civil War and Reconstruction.
He was committed to making America fully just, fully equal.
Grant was the first civil rights president.
It's as improbable a rise as any other figure in American history.
Indomitable will.
Dogged determination.
Moral vision.
He's a fighter.
It's truly an American story of not only patriotism to the nation, but for the values, who we are and who we aspire to be.
One of my superstitions has always been, when I started to go anywhere or to do anything, never to turn back or stop. until the thing intended was accomplished.